Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Spiritual Edition. And today we are starting a new book. So if you guys have a camera and you guys can see the screen, there is a particular alphabet in the English alphabet, and I won't say it out loud because I might get in trouble with YouTube. However, what I will do is I will say this. This particular alphabet is equivalent to the 17th letter. I'll just say that. Now, this is the earliest gospel, uh, and the subtitle is An Introduction to the Original Stories and Sayings of Jesus. And the author is John S. Kloppenborg. So, this book was inspired by spirit, actually. There is a little backstory about that. I won't go over it here. If you guys are interested in learning about it, I talked about it in my introduction to this particular book, and I will leave a link in the description box below for you guys to check that out. But what I'll say is that it's important to, okay, so this is what I'll say. Religion is a very touchy subject for a lot of people, and that includes me. I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian household, went to 6 years of Catholic school, so I was very much indoctrinated in that environment. But what I've learned is that it's important to listen to the message and not the person. It's easy to judge. So, and Jesus talked about not judging, right? Holding off your judgment. And it really isn't your place to judge. It's it's your higher soul's place to judge. Let's just put it that way. Or God, whatever you want to call it. So I'll just leave it at that. But before we begin, thank you for being here. If you like what we do here, please do consider our other book clubs. We have our health book clubs on Wednesdays and then financial book clubs on Thursdays. And we put all the books that we read or have read on YouTube in a playlist. So you guys can download it, listen to it when you're jogging, walking your dog, doing laundry, stuck in traffic, or whatever. And we have other things on there as well, not just book clubs. We've got our Akashic Records readings, as well as podcasts and other things that we're working on. So please do check it out. Check out our YouTube channel, like and subscribe and comment. I'd love to hear from you and see what you think, hear what you think. Also, please do consider signing up for our free monthly newsletter as well. And if you want to support us further, you can buy me a coffee, leave a donation. Check out our merch. We have many different merch for your fur babies, for your kitties and doggies, as well as humans. So please do check it out. We have new designs every month and updating old designs. So come back often and check them out. And then if you are in the Los Angeles area or visiting LA, please do consider coming to join us and meet us in person. We have a healing center that we use technologies based on Nikola Tesla's scalar wave research for holistic healing for both domestic cats and dogs, as well as humans. So you can read all about that technology on our website, as well as our other services that we provide as well. So we do appreciate you in whatever way, shape, or form that you guys can contribute and participate. But most important, we appreciate you being here. And thank you for being on this book club journey with us because, we love to read, and I think reading is a lost art. And thank you for listening. So I'm sure the authors thanks you as well. I know your higher soul does. Definitely. Okay. So, just a little back, I want to go back a little bit about the alphabet. So if you take simple gematria, which is A equals 1, 2, B equals 2, C equals 3, D equals 4, all the way to Z or Z, which is 26. This particular alphabet corresponds to the number 17. So what I'll do is in the chapters as I'm reading, instead of saying the actual alphabet, I will say the number 17. So you guys are, I think, pretty smart and you guys can figure it out. And it would be interesting, I've always been interested in going to the source, the primary source. You hear a lot about people taking other people's ideas or reports or whatever it is, and then Jesus kind of, it's like a telephone, right? If you've ever played telephone when you're young, by the time you get to the end or the last person, the story or the message is so convoluted, it's nothing like the original. So you always go back to the original. And what I like to do is when I see something floating around or an idea floating around all over the universe, all over the internet or whatever, I just go back to the original source and see, hey, what's all the fuss about? So that's part of the inspiration for this book. Okay, so let us begin. This is chapter 1, part 1. All right. So if you have a book, you could follow with us there. If not, you can follow with us here on camera, or you could just listen. And I will move the camera in a little bit here. Okay, here we go. Chapter 1, what is 17? Okay. By the 4th century of the Common Era, Christians had to decide which of their writings should be regarded as authoritative, which were useful but not normative, and which should be rejected as deviant or heretical. This process was necessary, for by that time many gospels, letters, apocalypses, and sundry treatises existed, each vying for authority within local Christian communities. For many of these documents, we have only names. But what an assortment of names there are! There were gospels written under the names of virtually all of the men and women associated with Jesus, apocalypses ascribed to Peter, Paul, and James, Acts of Andrew and Peter, Paul, yeah, Acts of Andrew, Peter, Paul, Thomas, John, and Pilate, and letters purporting to come from a host of personages mentioned in the New Testament. Most of these have perished, but a handful survives, mostly in tiny fragments or in brief excerpts quoted by other writers. Occasionally, the sands of Egypt give up one of these lost documents, as they did in the 1890s when fragments of the Gospel of Thomas were discovered in Upper Egypt, and later in 1945 when Coptic versions of the Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Philip, and the first and second apocalypses of James, and many other extra canonical documents were found. Just a side note, incidentally, if any of you are interested in the book club reading any of these books, let me know in the comments below, and we will read it. Very interesting. Okay, continue. More often, we must reconstruct the contents of these lost documents through a careful analysis of the later documents which quoted or referred to them, as we must do in the case of Paul's original letter to the Corinthians. This is what must be done in the case of the sayings, Gospel 17. All right, let me move the camera in just a little bit there. I think it's a little far out. Okay. Okay, 17 is neither a mysterious papyrus nor a parchment from stacks of uncatalogued manuscripts in an old European library. It is a document whose existence we must assume in order to make sense of other features of the Gospels. Although the siglum 17 seems rather mysterious, and the idea of a lost gospel sounds like it comes from the plot of a modern thriller, the truth is a little bit more banal. Quote 17 is a shorthand for the German word Quell, meaning source. Scholars did not invent 17 out of a fascination for mysterious or lost documents. 17 is posited from logical necessity. Put simply, the most efficient and compelling way to explain the relationship among the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, is to assume that Mark was used independently as a source for Matthew and Luke. Matthew and Luke, however, share some material that they did not get from Mark, about 4,500 words. It is this material that makes up the bulk of 17. It may be that someday we will have more tangible evidence of 17, perhaps a papyrus fragment of this document or other early documents that quoted 17. For now, however, we must rely on what can be deduced about this document from the two Gospels which used it, Matthew and Luke. This chapter will explain the reasons for positing 17. It begins with some observation about the Synoptic Gospels. A literary relationship among the Gospels. Comparison of the Synoptic Gospels indicates that some sort of literary relationship exists among them. Put simply, two have copied from the other, or one has copied from the other two. There are several reasons for this conclusion. First, the first three Gospels often display a high degree of verbatim agreement. Compare, for example, the stories of Jesus calling the four fishermen. Matthew chapter 4, verse 18 to 22, and Mark 1, 16 to 20. The strong verbal argument is obvious. In Greek, Matthew's pericope contains 89 words. Mark has 82. They agree on 57 or 64% of Matthew's words and 69.5% of Mark's. The word count in English will differ a bit. This degree of verbal agreement is at least as high as in other instances where we know one author to be copying another. The agreements are significant since they include not only the memorable saying, quote, "Follow me and I will make you fishers of men," which might be memorized, but also the rather unnecessary explanation, quote, "For they were fishermen," end quote. Moreover, Matthew and Mark agree even on very small details. For example, the type of net that was used. Matthew calls it an amphibilastron, a circular nesting net, and only one of the several types of nets in use in the 1st century CE. Mark uses the cognate verb amphibilen. Oh, sorry, butchered that word. Both agree in mentioning the father of James and John, even though he, like Mark's hired help, plays no special role in the story. The agreements between Matthew and Mark do not extend simply to choice of words, but include the order of episodes. Both accounts name Simon first, then Andrew, then James, then John, even though other lists of these disciples, Mark 3:16 to 18, 13:3, and the Gospel of the Ebionites. Oh, never heard of that before. Ebionites, for example, name these disciples in a different order. There is no special reason for narrating the call of Peter and Andrew first, and only then James and John. Yet Matthew and Mark agree on this sequence. In the Gospel of John, by contrast, Andrew comes first, then Peter, and James and John are not mentioned at all. John 1:35 to 42. Hence, the agreement of Matthew with Mark to narrate the call of the four disciples in the same order and in the same way, agreeing on various minor points, or minor details points to literary dependence. One has copied the other, or both have copied a common source. Similar observations could be made of pericope that Luke has in common with Mark. Take, for example, the call of Levi, Mark 2:13 and 14, and Luke 5:27 and 28. Mark has 36 words in Greek. Luke has 24, but they agree on 16 of these words, or 2/3 of Luke's words. What is perhaps most remarkable is that the call of Levi is narrated at all. Levi appears only here in known gospel tradition. He is never mentioned again by any other source. Matthew changed the name to Matthew. Oh. Matthew changed the name to Matthew, probably to connect this disciple with the one named in Matthew 10:3, Mark 3:18. That Mark and Luke would choose to relate the call of so obscure a disciple, both putting this call immediately after the story of the cure of the paralytic, Mark 2:1-12, and Luke 5:17-26, suggests that one account has borrowed from the other, or that both are using a common source. Oops, sorry about that. Let me read that again, because it was off. The book was a little bit off the camera there. Okay, so Matthew changed the name to Matthew. I didn't quite understand that. Probably to connect this disciple with the one named in Matthew 10:3, Mark 3:18. That Mark and Luke would choose to relate the call of so obscure a disciple, both putting this call immediately after the story of the cure of the paralytic, Mark 2:1-12, and Luke 5:17-26, suggests that one account has borrowed from the other, or that both are using a common source. Finally, we can compare Matthew and Luke, and again, find instances of very strong verbal agreement. Take, for example, John the Baptist's address to the crowds, Matthew 3:7-10, and Luke 3:7-9. The agreement between Matthew and Luke is remarkable. Matthew has 76 words in Greek, 61 or 80% in agreement with Luke. Luke has 72 words, 61 or 85%, agreeing exactly with Matthew. Although there are slightly different introductions, the words of John are virtually identical, apart from Matthew's singular noun, fruit, and its dependent adjective, quote, worthy, in place of Luke's plural noun and adjective. Matthew has, quote, do not presume, end quote, in contrast to Luke's, quote, do not begin, end quote. Luke also has an extra kai in verse 9, which is not easily translatable in English, but is used for emphasis. This type of agreement includes not only the choice of vocabulary, but extends to the inflection of words, word order, and the use of particles, the most variable aspects of Greek syntax. If Matthew and Luke were reproducing this oracle freely from memory, it is most unlikely that they would agree so closely on such highly variable elements of Greek. This type of agreement can be explained only on the supposition that Matthew copied Luke or vice versa, or both used a common written source. There is yet another reason to think that the synoptics are related through literary copying. If we align the three Gospels in parallel columns, as is done in modern synopsis, such as Kurt Aland's synopsis of the four Gospels, or Burton Throckmorton's Gospel Parallels, and there's an endnote for those books. If you guys are interested, you guys can read it or do a deep dive on your own, but we will not read the endnotes here. We see that the three often agree in relating the same incidents in the same relative order. Although in the early part of Matthew 3-13, Matthew and Mark have a rather different order of events. From Matthew 14:1 and Mark 6:16 onward, the two gospels agree almost completely in sequence. The significance of this strong agreement cannot be missed. If Matthew and Mark were completely independent tellings of the story of Jesus, it is unlikely that the writers would choose to relate all stories and sayings in the same order, especially when there was no thematic or narrative reason to do so. For example, there is no special reason why the story of Jesus' argument with the Pharisees about washing hands, Matthew 15:1 to 20 and Mark 7:1 to 23, should appear just before the story of the Syrophoenician woman's daughter, Matthew 15:21 to 28, Mark 7:24 to 30, or why the controversies about payments of taxes, Matthew 22:15 to 22 and Mark 12:13 to 17, comes just before the controversy about the resurrection, Matthew 22 to 23 to 33 and Mark 12:18 to 27. Yet Matthew and Mark agree in these sequences and in many more pericope. Luke and Mark agree in sequence even more strongly than do Matthew and Mark, and this indicates that copying has occurred. Thus, we can conclude that some kind of literary relationship exists among the first three Gospels. At this point, we cannot decide who is copying whom, but it is clear that both the wording and the sequence of the three Gospels is the result of literary interaction. All right, we will stop here for now. That's kind of interesting. Couple thoughts come to mind as I was reading that. Number one, here we have three people telling the same story, right? You've got Mark, Luke, and John. In my observation, people can look at the same event completely different. So let's say a car accident, three witnesses witnessed a car accident, and you can have three separate accounts. So that's number one. Number two, any kind of information. I remember my teacher says the teachings of a teacher is not, what's the word that he used? It's not twisted by the teacher. It's twisted by the student. That's because the student takes the teachings of the teacher and then filters it through his own education, background, belief system, and all that stuff. And so the message that comes out sounds different or is different. Sort of like the telephone game, right? So that's number two. And number three, it was a third one. I don't remember what it was now. Anyways. So those are the two that kind of comes to mind. Two points that come to mind. And, when you read, in my opinion, when you read anything or do a deep dive in anything, you're really looking at just one little aspect of a bigger picture. And I think, the Bible is a good example. There's a lot of arguments back and forth and debates about what the Bible is or isn't. There's many different aspects that you could look at it. So I think what I'm trying to say is keep an open mind. The message is more important than the procedure or the messenger or the, logical sequence, if you will, or whatever it is that philosophers and theologians do. They try to break it down and put it into little categories and things of that nature. But I think it's more important to listen to the message. Message is more important. But anyway, that's just kind of a couple of thoughts that came to my mind while I was reading that. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, what your experiences about religion and spirituality, if there is a difference, if there isn't. Um, I'd love to hear from you. Okay. Well, we will stop here for now, and I'll see you next time in our next book club. Okay, bye-bye now.